The year 1066 stands as one of the most pivotal moments in English history. The events that unfolded during this remarkable year would forever transform the landscape of Britain, its culture, language, and society. This is the story of how a group of Norse-descended warriors from northern France came to rule England, bringing with them profound changes that echo through the centuries to the present day. On a cold January morning in 1066, King Edward the Confessor drew his final breath. The childless monarch's death sparked a succession crisis that would lead to three claimants fighting for the English crown. Harald Godwinson, the wealthy and powerful Earl of Wessex, ascended to the throne with the backing of the Anglo-Saxon nobles. But across the English Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, believed the crown rightfully belonged to him, claiming Edward had promised him the succession years earlier. The stage was set for an epic confrontation, but before William could launch his invasion, another claimant emerged from the north. Harald Hardrada, the fearsome king of Norway, also sought the English throne, drawing on ancient Viking claims to the land. The fate of England hung in the balance as these three powerful men prepared for war. Harald Godwinson's reign began with the weight of these threats pressing down upon him. The newly crowned king spent the spring and summer of 1066 positioning troops along the southern coast, anticipating William's invasion. But fate had other plans. In September, Harald Hardrada struck first, landing in Yorkshire with a massive Viking fleet of 300 ships carrying perhaps 9,000 warriors. The Norwegian force, aided by Harald's own brother, Tostig Godwinson, achieved early success, defeating local forces at the Battle of Fulford on September 20. But Harald Godwinson responded with remarkable speed. Leading his army on a forced march north, covering an astounding 190 miles in just 4 days, he caught the Norwegian army by surprise at Stamford Bridge. The battle that followed on September 25 was brutal and decisive. The Norwegian army, unprepared for combat and separated from their ships, fought valiantly but was overwhelmed. Both Harald Hardrada and Tostig fell in the fighting, and the Viking threat to England was forever ended. The victory was complete, but Harald had no time to celebrate. Just 3 days after Stamford Bridge, William of Normandy landed on the south coast of England with an invasion force of approximately 7,000 men. Taking advantage of the southern winds that had prevented his crossing all summer, William established a beachhead at Pevensey and began constructing a wooden castle to secure his position. Harald, learning of the Norman landing, was forced to march his tired army south immediately. The speed required was punishing. The king needed to protect London and prevent William from establishing a stronger foothold. Many of Harold's best warriors had fallen at Stamford Bridge, and others were too exhausted or injured to make the journey south. Still more had simply departed for home, believing the fighting season was over. Despite these challenges, Harald managed to assemble a new army as he moved south, though many of his troops were inexperienced militia rather than professional soldiers. By October 13, the English forces had reached London, where Harald paused briefly to gather more troops and plan his strategy. The decisive battle took place on October 14, 1066, near the town of Hastings. Harold's army took up position on Senlac Hill, forming a shield wall, a traditional Anglo-Saxon defensive formation. The English position was strong, with the high ground offering a significant advantage. The battle began early in the morning with Norman archers firing uphill, though their arrows largely proved ineffective against the English shields. William then sent his infantry forward, but they struggled to make headway up the slope against the English shield wall. The first major breakthrough came when part of William's army retreated in disorder, prompting some of the English to break ranks and pursue them. This proved to be a costly mistake, as the Normans turned and cut down their pursuers. As the day wore on, William employed this feigned retreat tactic several more times, each instance weakening the English shield wall. The Norman Duke also demonstrated his tactical prowess by combining infantry, cavalry, and archer attacks in a coordinated manner previously unseen in England. The turning point of the battle came late in the day. According to the Bayeux Tapestry, Harald was killed by an arrow to the eye, though some contemporary accounts suggest he was cut down by Norman knights. Regardless of the exact manner of his death, the loss of the king proved devastating to English morale. As darkness approached, the English army broke and fled, pursued by Norman cavalry. The Battle of Hastings proved decisive, but William's conquest of England was far from complete. He first secured the southeastern counties and then moved to isolate London. The English nobles initially attempted to rally around Edgar Atheling, Edward the Confessor's great-nephew, but their resistance crumbled in the face of Norman strength. On Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The years following the conquest saw William methodically consolidating his control over England. He faced numerous rebellions, particularly in the north, where he responded with brutal efficiency in what became known as the Harrying of the North. This campaign of systematic destruction left much of northern England devastated, with some regions taking generations to recover. William's approach to ruling England was revolutionary. He claimed all land as his personal property and redistributed it to his Norman followers, creating a new feudal aristocracy. The old Anglo-Saxon nobility was almost entirely replaced, with only a handful of English nobles retaining significant lands and titles. The Normans introduced castle building on an unprecedented scale. Unlike the wooden fortifications of Anglo-Saxon England, Norman castles were typically built of stone, creating permanent symbols of Norman authority across the landscape. These castles served as both military strongpoints and centers of local government, fundamentally changing the way England was administered. The Norman impact on English society was profound and long-lasting. The new rulers brought with them their own language, Norman French, which became the language of the royal court and the nobility. This linguistic influence can still be seen in modern English, where many words related to government, law, and cuisine have French origins. The Normans also transformed English architecture, introducing the Romanesque style that would later evolve into Gothic. The great cathedrals and churches built during this period remain some of the most impressive monuments of medieval England. Durham Cathedral, begun in 1093, stands as perhaps the finest example of Norman architectural ambition and skill. The conquest led to significant changes in English law and administration. William ordered a comprehensive survey of England's lands and resources, recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086. This remarkable document provides an unprecedented snapshot of medieval English society and remains an invaluable historical source. The Norman system of government was more centralized than its Anglo-Saxon predecessor. William maintained the English system of shires but appointed his own officials, called sheriffs, to administer them. He also created a more formal system of royal justice, laying the groundwork for the later development of English common law. The transformation of the English Church was another significant aspect of the Norman Conquest. William replaced most English bishops and abbots with Norman churchmen, creating a more direct connection with Rome and continental European religious practices. This led to a flourishing of monastic life and religious architecture in England. Military organization also changed dramatically. The Norman system of knight service, where land was held in exchange for military duties, replaced the Anglo-Saxon fyrd, or militia. This created a professional warrior class that would dominate English society for centuries to come. The impact of the Norman conquest extended far beyond England's borders. Under William and his successors, England became more closely connected to continental Europe, particularly France. This relationship would shape English politics and culture for generations, leading to centuries of English involvement in continental affairs. The Norman influence can be seen in countless aspects of English society. The very nature of the English language was transformed, with thousands of French words being absorbed into everyday speech. The legal system, architecture, cuisine, and social structures all bear the unmistakable mark of Norman influence. The story of the Norman conquest is also preserved in remarkable detail through contemporary sources. The Bayeux Tapestry, created in the decades following the conquest, provides a unique visual narrative of the events of 1066. This extraordinary work of art, nearly 70 meters long, offers invaluable insights into the weapons, armor, and tactics of the period. The Norman victors were also careful to document their triumph. Contemporary chronicles, while often biased in favor of the Normans, provide detailed accounts of the conquest and its aftermath. These sources, combined with archaeological evidence and later historical records, allow for a comprehensive understanding of this pivotal period. The consequences of the Norman conquest continued to reverberate through English society for centuries. The Norman aristocracy gradually merged with the English population, creating a unique Anglo-Norman culture. Yet the distinction between Norman rulers and English subjects remained significant for generations, influencing everything from marriage patterns to political alignments. The transformation of English society was not without its costs. The establishment of Norman rule led to significant social displacement and economic disruption. Many English nobles lost their lands and positions, while others were forced to adapt to new Norman customs and expectations. The common people faced new obligations and restrictions under the more rigid feudal system imported from Normandy. The Norman conquest also had significant implications for the development of English national identity. The experience of being conquered and ruled by a foreign elite contributed to the emergence of a distinct English consciousness. The gradual fusion of Norman and English cultures created something entirely new, a hybrid identity that would eventually become recognizably English. The Norman installation of feudalism in England was more comprehensive and systematic than in many other European countries. This had long-lasting effects on English social structure and land ownership patterns. The concentration of land ownership among a relatively small number of noble families, a pattern established by the Norman Conquest, persisted well into the modern era. The conquest also affected England's relationship with its neighbours. William's successful invasion encouraged subsequent English monarchs to assert claims to territories in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. The Norman Conquest thus set in motion the long process of British state formation that would ultimately lead to the creation of the United Kingdom. The Norman period saw significant developments in education and learning. Norman churchmen established new schools and strengthened existing ones, while Norman patronage supported the development of scholarship and literature. The introduction of Norman French as an administrative and literary language alongside Latin created a multilingual cultural environment that fostered intellectual exchange. The physical landscape of England was dramatically altered by the Norman Conquest. Beyond the obvious impact of castle construction, the Normans reorganized rural settlements, established new towns, and modified farming practices. They introduced new crops and agricultural techniques, contributing to increased agricultural productivity. The Norman influence on English art and culture extended beyond architecture. They brought new styles of manuscript illumination, different musical traditions, and novel approaches to decorative arts. The fusion of Norman and Anglo-Saxon artistic traditions created distinctive new forms that would characterize English medieval art. The conquest also had significant implications for trade and commerce. The Normans maintained and expanded England's trading connections, particularly with continental Europe. They established new trading communities, often centered around their castles and religious houses, and introduced new commercial practices. The Norman administrative system, while initially foreign and oppressive to many English people, proved remarkably efficient and adaptable. Many of its innovations, such as the use of written records and professional administrators, became permanent features of English government. The Exchequer, developed under the Normans to manage royal finances, remained a central institution of English government for centuries. The impact of the Norman Conquest on English law was particularly significant. While William initially promised to uphold English law and custom, Norman legal practices gradually merged with Anglo-Saxon traditions to create a unique legal system. This process laid the groundwork for the development of English common law, which would become one of England's most important contributions to world civilization. The Norman period also saw important developments in urban life. The Normans established new towns and expanded existing ones, often in connection with their castles. These urban centers became important focal points for trade, craft production, and administrative activity. Many English towns still show the influence of Norman planning in their layout and street patterns. The religious changes brought by the Normans extended beyond the institutional church. They introduced new saints and religious practices, built new monasteries and churches, and strengthened England's connections with European Christianity. The resulting religious culture was distinctively Anglo-Norman, combining elements from both traditions. The Norman Conquest also had significant implications for social mobility. While the immediate effect was to create a rigid hierarchy dominated by Norman nobles, over time new opportunities emerged for social advancement through service to the crown, the church, or in urban commerce. This created pathways for social mobility that would become increasingly important in later medieval England. The legacy of the Norman Conquest extends far beyond medieval England. Its influence can be seen in modern English institutions, language, and culture. The Norman contribution to English history was not simply one of conquest and domination, but of cultural synthesis and institutional innovation. The events of 1066 and their aftermath demonstrate how a single year can alter the course of history. The Norman Conquest brought profound changes to England, transforming its society, culture, and institutions. These changes would shape not only England but, through England's later influence, much of the world. From the strategic brilliance of William's campaign to the lasting impact of Norman institutions, the conquest stands as a testament to how military victory can lead to lasting cultural and social transformation. The Norman Conquest remains one of the most significant events in English history, its effects still visible in the modern world. The Norman Conquest marked the last successful foreign invasion of England, yet its legacy was not simply one of military victory. Through a complex process of cultural exchange and institutional development, the Normans and English created something new and distinctive. This fusion would prove remarkably durable, shaping English society for centuries to come. The story of the Norman Conquest reveals how historical events often have consequences far beyond their immediate impact. What began as a military campaign became a catalyst for profound social, cultural, and institutional change. The England that emerged from this transformation was neither purely Norman nor purely Anglo-Saxon, but something uniquely its own.